message is transmitted.
I'm ready.
You ready? Okay,
Yeah.
cool. Melanie Weller. So good to see
I'm ready. Thank you, Sanre. Thank you for having me.
you. Yeah, it's been about a year, right? Since last time I saw you.
I believe we talked. Yeah, I can't remember if it was the end of last year or the beginning of this year, because when you did a tarot reading for me, I know I followed up because I had asked you if I was going to be traveling this year, and you said, no, the tarot cards don't really say that. And I think it was obviously very accurate.
Yeah, I remember you were surprised, and I
As we're in 2020 with the pandemic. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I haven't done age. I've really made a temple out of this room this year, and I spent a lot of time in here meditating and lifting weights and just getting through it the best way I can.
Yeah.
So, Melanie, you are an expert on one of my favorite topics, which is occult anatomy. And you are specifically an expert in the vagus nerve, correct?
Well, that was certainly the, well, I'm a physical therapist by conventional terms, and the vagus nerve has certainly been my portal to understanding occult anatomy. And I would contend that it's the structure on which that holds our occult anatomy,
Yes.
that binds it all together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it seems to me, and from the research I've done on the vagus nerve, that it's the physical manifestation of what we would call Kundalini energy and also the 7 chakra system.
Yes, I think it's I can see that. I talk about it a little bit more in terms of that it's like the Laniakea supercluster, that it's like an internal cosmology that
That's super cool.
holds, and that it holds the chakra systems in the way that I see chakras as individual galaxies within that supercluster. Our Milky Way galaxy is a little tiny dot in the Laniakea supercluster.
That's fascinating. So one of the topics that I'm most passionate about, and well, really is just the term as above, so below, and all of the different ways you can interpret that. And it's occurred to me as well, and I know we were talking about this through text, that the galaxies do represent, especially a spiral galaxy, which is spinning, does represent the typical, or it resembles, the typical spinning wheel design of a chakra, the image that you're
absolutely
sort of familiar with a chakra, and that the galaxies of the universe could be the natty points of the universe, just like we have the 72,000 natty points within our own body.
Absolutely. I haven't built out my system yet to that extent, but I think that's a very, very logical progression of it, where it started for me. I've branded myself as a stress management expert for a long time, and have branded myself around treating the vagus nerve as a pinched nerve. And I have this process now to evaluate and treat it in the body. And in the throes of my own midlife spiritual awakening, I ended up taking a couple steps back from my practice, because I had this very grounded practice. I have a lot of credentials. I have a lot of letters after my name that I've collected over the years, different credentials. And part of what happened to me was, I will tell you, in hindsight, I will tell you, I've always been intuitive, but I thought my intuition and my logic were the same thing. I didn't really see them as different things. And in having my own practice and being in my own space, really almost my old office was where all this started, was almost like a trance room booth kind of thing. Like it was an office in the back of a yoga studio with no windows. And so it really built, like the energy really could build up in it in interesting ways. And I've always used metaphor with my clients, but when I started really describing things like, oh, it's like there's this woman, an older woman, and she's in a pink suit and she's got a pink orchid on her lapel. And, this particular client said, Melanie, you just described my grandmother and the outfit we buried her in. And I didn't know I was seeing dead people on the movie screen inside of my head, or that's not but I thought that was kind of fun that I could, there's a whole another skill level there, but it was also very disconcerting. And how do I reconcile that with my more conventional skills and my conventional practice? And so, and my life started to fall apart. And it was so much like I was clearly shoving a square peg into a round hole, and something needed to shift. And so I slowed down some and I did a bunch of reading. And one of the books I read was Graham Hancock's Fingerprints of the Gods.
Oh my God, it's such a good book.
Such a good book.
Yeah.
And in it, he talks about how mythology was a mode of scientific writing.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a new concept to me at the time. So for example, many of the numbers of the Earth's precessional cycle are in the myth of Isis and Osiris.
Mm-hmm.
And so the story was a way they communicated the cosmology.
Yes.
And so that led me in two directions. My PT brain was like, oh, well, the Earth's at a 23.5 degree tilt. What's 23.5 degrees from the midline of the body? And the opening where your vagus nerve exits the skull, and you have one on the right and one on the left, is 23.5 degrees from the center of where the spinal cord exits.
Oh my.
And there's 47 degrees between the pole stars that our Earth points towards over thousands of years. And normal rotation between our first and second cervical vertebrae, our atlas and our axis, is 47 degrees to each side.
That's fascinating.
And our anterior cruciate ligaments sit in the knee at a 47 degree angle of inclination. And normal rotation at the foot is 23 degrees. And these are average angles. There's always, some variation, but that's but there's research that shows that, these are the average angles. And so, and certainly I can pull out 30 and 180 and other, like your shoulder has 100, you have 180 degrees of flexion, and there's all these numbers that really go that you could, that match numbers like 360 and 72. Like the average carrying angle at the elbow is 72 degrees.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's all of these angles that match the precessional cycle of the Earth. And what I've put together, and I will tell you just through experience, but have it into a more organized form now, is that the less aligned you are at those angles, or the further off you are, the less likely you are to feel well.
Totally. Yeah. That makes sense.
And the second way that really showed up for me was in, I did this is maybe 6 or 7 years ago, I did a free online stress management class, and I ended up talking a lot about the ventricles of the brain. And the ventricles in the brain make cerebral spinal fluid. And this has been my favorite picture of anything anatomical ever for the 20 plus years I've owned this set of anatomy books. It's a Sabota anatomy. And there's an image that's a compilation of MRI images to give you a 3D picture of what the ventricles look like. And after I did this class, I thought, oh, I'll just stamp a picture of it and stick it on my social media. And when I opened the book, it was the first time I had opened the book since I had been studying astrology for myself. And the ventricles in the brain look just like the ram's horns for Aries. And in astrology, Aries rules the head. And so then I was like, well, where's the rest of it? If that's the, because I was in this mindset already about how mythology was a mode of talking about science. And as a stress management expert, like this just opened up. So it just like, it was like having like all of the pieces started to come together in like in a way that they just never had before. The way your hyoid bone sits on top of your larynx looks just like the symbol for Taurus, and Taurus rules the throat. And your aortic arch is the same shape as the symbol for Leo, and Leo rules the heart. And it works this way the whole way through the body. Libra, the sign of the scales, rules the kidneys, and your kidneys sit in your low back like a set of scales.
Wow.
And a woman's reproductive system looks very much like a scorpion, and Scorpio rules the reproductive system, where the vagina is the tail, the uterus is the body, and the ovaries are the claws. Your Aquarius rules the calves, and your calves are shaped like a water vessel. Pisces rules the feet, and your feet are like your flippers, your two fish. So it really just like, it works the whole way through the body with the symbol and the sigil. And so I've used the story, one, to really help people with those spiritual and stress related underpinnings of the physical dysfunction. And as humans, there's a whole science to this too, because as humans, we respond to stress more than we respond to, or we respond to story more than we respond to process. Like, you can't logic yourself out of pain or out of a chronic condition, because the difference between acute, subacute pain and chronic pain is that chronic pain gets stuck into your limbic system where your emotions are, and you need an emotional key to get it out of there.
Mm-hmm. And logic isn't going to do it, because logic isn't
going to do it,
brain
right?
Process. You need to engage your right hemisphere.
Absolutely. And story, the neuroscience of story, that it gives us a dopamine release, and it gives us oxytocin release. It makes us feel more connected, and so you get all the really good feel good hormones. And the leading pain science experts will tell you that they love it when people cry or get angry when they explain pain to them, because they know they're going to get better. It's the people with a flat affect that they worry about.
Because they're holding it all inside.
They're holding it all inside, right? And so, and I've been really good at making people cry for years. And every now and then people get, and it's because people often, when they start crying, they start apologizing. God, don't cry. Like, I'm really good. This happens to me all the time.
Yeah.
That, people will start crying, and you do have to let those emotions move. And one of my favorite reactions, it hasn't happened quite as often, after a session, and like, I treat people both in person and online, but I suppose I've had this experience a little more with the in-person clients, where they sit up at the table and they're a little confused at first because their pain's gone and they can't figure out, like, where did it go? Because it was too easy to, like, they've been struggling so long with it that it was just too easy to, that, like, they're confused at where it went. And then they get angry because nobody else figured this out sooner. Like, why was it so easy for you to solve this problem? And I spent months or years,
because they're completely ignoring half of the issue, right? Like, this is part of the society we live in, is an emotionally repressed society. Like, your emotions aren't real. Don't pay attention to those. It's just half of who you are, And my own story of healing has everything to do with getting in touch with my emotions and no longer repressing them. And what's really exciting, and why I was really excited to talk to you about this, is that these stories, these archetypal religious stories, just like you're saying, in my opinion, are all sort of ways that the right brain is telling the left about itself. And about the body. Like, we have these archetypal stories, like you're saying with astrology, it's the brain and the body telling you about you and about the patterns.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think the only rule we ever follow is as above, so below.
Yeah.
And I learned this just very organically over the years in working primarily with complicated chronic pain patients and others that just hadn't found success for their situations, that whatever was happening inside of their body was playing out externally in their business, in their personal life. And, that there was clearly this relationship for what was happening. And my superpower is really helping people with those spiritual underpinnings of the physical dysfunction. That's what I love and what I was good at, even before I realized what I was good at.
Well, I feel
in
like
terms of connecting to that story.
one of the things that both physically, and it happens to you physically and emotionally and mentally when you go through a spiritual awakening, is that you realize that you are the cause of your own life in every way. That life isn't something that's happening to you, it's something that you're doing. And going
Absolutely.
from one mentality to the next is a shift in consciousness. It's a total shift in awareness. You become aware that you are the cause of everything that's happening in your own life. That's not to say that things don't happen to you, they do, but the situations you find yourself in, the entirety of your external experience has everything to do with your internal experience.
Well, and that's a lot of power. Like, we're all really happy to take credit for all the good stuff that happens.
Right. But it's the
to
negative
us.
stuff and the bad stuff
The negative stuff,
that's empowering, when you realize that these things aren't just happening to you, that you're playing a major role in how your life plays out and what does happen to you. That's empowerment.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, when you can see your trauma and your hardships and challenges as initiations over victimizations.
Yes.
That's really then opens up the transformation.
Yeah.
Like, that's, that you, part of I was a master of repressed emotions. It wasn't safe to have emotions in my house growing up. And I was a Navy wife for 20 years. So I was great at suppressing emotions while my husband had this crazy schedule, was gone all the time, moving all over the world. And, but a big part of my childhood trauma is around lost voice and not being able to have a voice, and specifically being able to, being asked to not sing in the choir, to show up at the choir and then be told to mouth the words, especially when we had an important, quote unquote important performance, such as if we were doing a musical, or I grew up outside of Washington, D.C., so we sang at this Kennedy Center as well. And and so, like, now to be working with the nerve that innervates your vocal cords, and, and finding my own voice and my own truth, and really learning not to, I don't even want to say learning not to separate, but learning that my technical side and my spiritual side work, they make each other better. They don't compete.
Yes, absolutely. They enhance each other. It's when you really get, so there's so many different ways to explain this. One way is to say your thoughts, your feelings, and your beliefs. Another would be to say your right hemisphere, your left hemisphere, and the corpus callosum and brainstem structure. But when you get this, there's so many different versions of this holy trinity. There's one in every sense of spirituality. And when you get the three into alignment with each other, now you're creating magic. Now you can move mountains.
Absolutely. Well, and I'll give you yes, we are absolutely made at Trinity. Like, embryologically, we come from an endoderm, a mesoderm, and an ectoderm. Our nerves and our arteries and muscles, all have fundamentally three layers to them. And so this Trinity is huge. And I think when we think about, for all the talk that there's about living in a polarized or a duality and a piece, that, like, if you have a North Pole and a South Pole, the third piece is your electromagnetic field. Like, everything happens in Trinity. We live on the third planet from the sun. Like, it literally all happens in Trinity.
And the process of what, you hear this phrase all the time, becoming the observer, is stepping into that third piece and getting out of duality consciousness and realizing not just unity, but that there is a third position, and observing life from the third position.
Absolutely. And, and then I think even, in the way that cross symbolism is very prevalent, like in different religions, certainly in Christianity, but that, we have the cardinal directions. And in Egyptian creation mythology, one of the earliest descriptions of what I think is they're referring to as the cardinal directions are knowledge, wisdom, magic, and truth. And we value knowledge, wisdom, and magic really highly. We don't value, or knowledge, wisdom, and truth. We don't value magic collectively.
Not currently.
As much.
We're definitely, I think, going to grow into it. Nikola Tesla was famous for saying that when science starts to study non-physical phenomena, it'll make more progress in, I think you said 10 years than it had in all its previous.
Oh,
Whatever. It's the acknowledgement and the study of non-physical things that's gonna like, oh, that's what magic is. Okay, now we get it. It's conscious.
right.
It's the
It's
science.
conscious. Well, and it's field, like I would call it field therapy. Like it's
Yeah.
treating like my vagus nerve exercise. I know this when I first created them because it was more of a download that this is just what it is, what it needs to be.
Mhm.
But now I understand I'm engaging the electromagnetic field. I'm engaging
Yes.
the toroidal field. And that's why the exercise works so well.
Because that's where the story is held. That's where the information
Absolutely.
is held. It's an electromagnetic field, but we're coming into the understanding that it also carries information. That's how I'm able to read tarot. I mean, look, I could explain how I'm able to read tarot 1,000 different ways, right? And they're all correct. It's just they're all the same thing, just different ways of saying what's going on. But one of the ways you could explain it to a rather left-brain person is that my toroidal field is interacting with yours, and they are sharing information, and that information is coming through the cards.
Absolutely. And well, and there's research to support that we perceive other people's emotions through our toroidal fields. Like there's information, there's research to support that. And so, and for all of the really amazing brain science research, and I think it's great, like we should, but your brain, by the time your brain has reacted to it, it's already come through your field, and it's come through your vagus nerve, it's come through your senses. And when, and brain input basically equals brain output. I don't disagree with that statement. That's a very, fundamental tenet of neuroscience. But if you can give your brain, if you can create your input, make your input pathways better, then you get better output.
Yeah,
and you're not so stuck in your story. So like if your vagus nerve has the mechanical freedom to take better information to your brain, which is the vast majority of its function. It's got motor function for sure, because it innervates your vocal cords, your heart, and your digestive system. So it's literally your gut brain, your heart brain, and your voice. But it has a lot of, it's primarily afferent, which means that it takes information from your body up to your brain. And if you can, like if we get stuck really where we have horizontal structures in the body, like the pelvic floor, the diaphragm, vocal cords, base of the skull. For me, there are 6 major compression points that go with this. And like the diaphragm is an easy place, and really relevant one to work with. In all humans, the right side of our diaphragm has more muscle mass than the left. So theoretically, the right side will always win. And your vagus nerve travels down with your esophagus through your diaphragm. So if you have a lot of pull on that right side of your diaphragm, it can cause vagus nerve compression as the nerve is going through the diaphragm.
And what would cause that?
Well, there is an epidemic of right diaphragm dominance. It's a very, very common pattern. It probably has to do somewhat with the reason, because most people are right-handed, and we don't live in a more agricultural hunter-gatherer that would force us to be more ambidextrous in certain ways. But in the bigger picture, the root of any problem to me, whether it's a physical pain, a disease, or a limiting belief, a mindset issue, is resisting your own expansion in our ever expanding universe.
Yes. Yeah.
And
Insistence and resistance are 2 things.
Absolutely. And so when we are locked down on the right side, realize that the earth below us and the solar system above us are spinning in the opposite direction. So we're literally resisting our alignment on this fractal scale.
That's very interesting. It's the same way we resist our emotions.
Absolutely. Well, and I think emotions can't move when these horizontal systems are locked up. Nobody experiences stress or trauma and has really great arm walk. We all lock up and kind of freeze, through our trunks.
We hold our tensions and our stresses and our traumas in our body. I know that I can tell definitely that when I get stressed out, there's a very specific place in my back that starts to hurt immediately. It's the same place every
Yeah,
time.
absolutely. And so when, and this is very consistent with the concept of chi moving through the body
Yes.
too. But, and so these 6 compression points, primary ones that I use, are really almost like you can look at them like a hexagram too,
Mm-hmm.
in the body, like an I Ching thing. But if you can't, but they dam the flow of everything that goes vertically in the body. And I contextualize a lot of this around the vagus nerve,
Mm-hmm.
but it's also damming up your arterial flow, your venous flow, your lymphatic flow, and your chi flow.
Mm-hmm. And all these things are connected, right? And that's another lesson. When you start to expand your consciousness and having a spiritual awakening, one of the first realizations you come to is that everything is connected. There's no separation, especially within your own body. It's crazy to me to think that anything is happening with your own body that isn't affecting everything else about your body.
Absolutely. But we're not, we individually and collectively have what I call an Osiris wound. So in the Egyptian myth of Isis and Osiris, Osiris was the king of Egypt and his wife was Isis. And his brother Set wanted to be king. He was jealous and angry and wanted to be king. And so he tricked Osiris into laying down in a bejeweled coffin, had his 72 soldiers shut the lid, nail it, and carry him to the Nile River to his death. Isis retrieved his body, took him to a cave, and brought him back to life. When Set found out about this, he was furious. And so he tracked down Osiris and chopped his body into pieces and scattered them down the Nile River. Isis found all of those pieces except for his phallus, and for that she made him a new one. And back at the cave, she brought him back to life long enough to conceive their divine child Horus.
Mm-hmm.
And then Osiris went on to be king of the underworld, which for the Egyptians was where all life came from and all treasures were found. And we use dismemberment metaphors in our language all the time. We say we can't get it together, we're falling apart, our hearts are broken, our lives are shattered. We'd give our left arm for something that we really desire. And so but everybody in that, so you can imagine being in that story of Isis and Osiris, everybody probably thought Osiris's destiny was to be the king of Egypt, but his true destiny was to be the king of the underworld. And he literally had to come apart to come together in a new way. And that's a very relatable story. That's the proverbial midlife crisis. That's what trauma is coming apart, because you can't be the same person that you were after you've had a trauma. It opens the door to a completely different destiny, and one that was always your destiny, but that you were blind to before. And on a bigger scale, just because I come out of the medical system, medicine has a terrible Osiris wound where it's all chopped into pieces and one part is not talking to the other. And very few people within the medical profession are good at looking at you as a whole person. And medicine really needs Isis to show up and put it back, remember it in that new way to go, so you can go find its true destiny.
Yeah. I have an interesting hypothesis. I mean, I think it's interesting, and I don't think I'm the first person to come up with this. I'm sure I'm not. But when I think of the Set and Osiris story, I think of this sort of story that's laid out in a lot of religions, and it's the idea of the fall of man. And I don't know if you're familiar with Drunvalo Melchizedek's work on sacred geometry, but in his first book, he talks about the fall of man being a transition, I'm summarizing here, from being a right brain dominant species to a left brain dominant species. And I think that is kind of what's playing out in the story of Set and Osiris, as Set being the war god, the masculine patriarchal god, and Osiris being the right brain sort of lord of magic. We could also relate this to the Sumerian story of Enlil and Enki, Enlil being Set, being Osiris. And I think that they're in a lot of ways, like I said, the body is trying to tell you about itself. It's telling you about the transition from a right brain dominant being to a left brain dominant being. And the left brain being where the speech center is and the logical center and where our science and mathematics come from, and the right brain being the more feminine, creative, more plugged into source and to the underworld. part
Oh,
of ourselves.
absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. No, absolutely. And uh, so I have two things to say about that. There's a really fantastic book that is by Peter Kingsley called A Story Waiting to Pierce You. And it's the story of how shamanism came from Siberia to ancient Egypt and to Pythagoras in particular.
Mhm.
And it's like an 85-page book with 85 pages of footnotes because it's rooted in historical evidence.
Mhm.
And it's very much along those, lines, but talks about how like we're here for ecstatic creation. And there's, but it's really that, somewhere in like approaching ancient Greece is where we kind of lost, we sort of made that jump from the more right brain, I think, to the more left brain thing. And it's such an interesting thing because our verbal pathways in our body operate at about 42 or 40,000 bits per second, something like that. And our nonverbal pathways operate at 11 million bits per second.
Mhm.
So when we take in information through logic and words, it is so much slower than when we take in information through our intuition and our spiritual connections.
Yeah. And my thought about that is sort of the difference between binary and quantum computing. Binary ones and zeros has a need to separate everything out, whereas quantum is everything all at once. And
Yeah.
when you're taking in information, I mean, verbal communication is linear, and it has to be taken in a linear fashion. But nonverbal communication that includes images, sounds, and all these different stimuli can encode information into you almost instantaneously.
Oh, absolutely. And, in so many creation mythologies, like in the beginning, it started with the word, that in the beginning, there was the word, that the, reality, or, our universe was spoken into creation. And sound is so incredibly powerful. And, and certainly sound healing is getting a lot of traction in different ways, but
I do
even
binaural beats every single day.
even like linguistically, like I love looking at Hebrew, like in Hebrew, because every Hebrew letter has a numerical value too, and Hebrew is structured very much like a code, where like their word for pregnancy adds up to 270, and a normal pregnancy is about 270 days.
Whoa, that's interesting.
And their word for water is shaped like a water molecule. That's written out. And so there's all of, so it's very, and beyond that, their words for color and frequency mathematically correspond to the color and frequency of, to the frequencies of color and time in hertz.
Wow. I've heard, I think I was listening to Bashar talk, and he was saying that the Hebrew language is based on sacred geometry, and that's why it has these properties, because it is a code. It's a code based on, it's a language created from numerology and sacred geometry, and the combination of those two things coming up in these sacred forms that are the Hebrew letters that have an incredible amount of information encoded into each and every one of them. Same thing with rune.
Yeah. Well, the thing is that you leverage these sounds very specifically for healing. Like, for example, yom is the Hebrew word for day. And so we take in our light dark cycles through our heads, through our eyes, perceiving light and dark. And when people have cranial dysfunction, or like where I might do craniosacral work, like especially, and I usually do it this way more in a group setting, but sometimes I'll do it individually too, that like you can have them chant the word yom a few times and it normalizes their cranial mechanics.
Yeah, let me read something to you that you might find interesting, if I can find it here. There it is. This is from the Initiated Interpretation into Ceremonial Magic by Aleister Crowley. Sorry, I'll find it in just. So, the Spirits of the Goetia are portions of the human brain. Their seals, therefore, represent methods of stimulating or regulating those particular spots through the eye. The names of God are vibrations calculated to establish A, general control of the brain, B, control over the brain in detail, and C, control over one special portion.
Hmm.
And I need to look more into it, but these the Lesser Key of Solomon and these Hebrew letters it really might be talking about the exact same thing here.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, and I think this is why so many people like chanting in Sanskrit, for example. I think Sanskrit is structured probably very much the same way, even if, I don't know if we have the numerical values for Sanskrit, but I'm sure vibrationally it's quite similar.
They're probably out there. Yeah. There's so much.
Yeah.
It's so frustrating that you can read and read and read and research all day. And there's always so much more you want to know.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I know. I've had to really, now that I feel at this point, I'm very clear on what my brand is and what I'm bringing forward. And so, my vision is definitely to bring in collaborators so that, for as much as I'd like to know everything, that the reality is that
no, you've really got to.
It's not going to happen.
Hone in on what your slice of the pizza is, and then find the people that complete your pizza.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, and when I talk about the vagus nerve compression points too, going back to your, you said something earlier about a fire hose or like the flow of, information. Like when those horizontal structures are compressed, it's like putting information through a coffee straw.
Yeah, trying to shove
compared to a fire hose.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so we get a very distorted perception of our stories, and we get a very distorted perception of reality.
And back to this is something I was excited to talk about. Stories. Now, any neuroscientist would kind of tell you live inside the story that the brain tells itself, right? That's something you've heard. Now, if your story sucks, and if you're telling yourself a terrible story that's full of tragedy, I mean, you're going to experience that. And that's so I know that you work with people in healing their stories, right? And helping them and heal the story to heal the body. That seems revolutionary to me.
Well, thank you. I think it is. And the story, we all have a physical expression of our internal narrative. Yeah. And an internal expression of our physical narrative. Like we know through research that posture changes our hormones. And when you stand like your favorite superhero for 2 minutes, you get higher testosterone and lower cortisol levels.
I've heard that. I've never put it into practice. I've heard that several times. So yeah, that makes sense.
And we read people's movement and posture all the time, to infer how they're feeling or what's going on with them. But in the way that, so I've taken this way that the cosmos is coded into us, where we have, the ventricles look like the ram's horns for Aries. And like, we literally have a ram living in our heads. And if your ram's horns are wonky, you're going to have some kind of head issue, whether that's a perceptual issue of, and being able to see something literally or metaphorically, or that you're could show up physically as headaches and neck pain and things like that as well. So treating fundamentally treating story is treating the expression of these of the cosmos in your body, because we've named these constants and given them archetypal qualities, and our names, the research shows that our names influence the shape of our faces, especially around our eyes. And so naming is incredibly powerful. And because we've named this, it's going to have an influence on you, whether you believe in it or not.
And understanding what beliefs are. People have a general misunderstanding of what beliefs are, because your beliefs are the basic operating system of your computer, right? Your beliefs are how you program yourself, and you will experience your beliefs because they're subconscious, and they're going to express themselves through everything you do and notice, and what your likes and dislikes are. My likes and dislikes have changed drastically since my spiritual awakening. Now, don't get me wrong. I still love Metallica, but I ain't going to listen to it Uh, I mean, they're great, right? Like I used to love heavy metal so much, and now I listen mostly to meditation music because you start to realize the effect that life isn't something that's happening to you; it's something you're participating in and engaging with, and it's how you build yourself. Now, again, I'm not telling anybody not to listen to what you love, but for me, it changed when I changed my
Sure,
story.
right.
I changed my likes and dislikes and the things that I notice about life.
Absolutely. Well, and that's what expansion is.
Yeah,
That's what
and
evolution is.
yeah, and so these archetypal stories of ancient Egypt and ancient Greece and from all over the world, I feel like you're bringing back what they were doing, which is treating the body through the stories that we tell. You're treating the information field.
Absolutely. Yeah. And you can really take, this system is easiest to understand through Western astrology, but it works across every time I delve into another cultural mythology, it works.
Well, one of my favorite ways of kind of going about talking about this is pointing out that, like I said, I read you that passage from Aleister Crowley that was written in the I think 1894, or it's very very old,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so a modern sort of idea of this is the good ET bad ET narrative. That's it's a modern mythology regarding reptilian aliens and aliens from different places in the galaxy. But
Mm-hmm.
and that's not to say that this isn't a real thing that's happening, as I fully believe in aliens. But I think it's interesting that it's also telling the story of transcending the reptilian mind, of moving up in the
Absolutely.
neocortex from the reptilian
It
brain
is.
into the higher mammalian brain. And that's
Absolutely.
that, and which create that would be a shift in consciousness. I mean, that's the story
Yeah.
that I hear when I listen to that particular
No,
narrative.
yeah, I completely agree. I hadn't thought of it exactly those terms before, but yeah, absolutely. I mean, we live these stories at like in an incredible detail. Like even for me, one of the many ways the Isis Osiris story has showed up in my life is, so Isis and Osiris were also brother and sister as well as husband and wife. And my husband had the same birthday.
Your husband and you had the same birthday?
Yeah, he's a year older than me, but we were born on the same day. And so like we literally play these stories out in our lives on in glaring detail.
Yeah, we really do. I mean, everything that you experience as an exterior world is a hallucination created by your brain. Everything. I mean, it's not to say that the world isn't real. The world is real, but your experience of it has to be first interpreted through your information field, and then through your bodily senses, through your eyes, through your ears, and then into your brain, and then your brain constructs a holographic hallucination that's a representation of the quantum field that you actually exist in. So the entire cosmos, the entire outer world in which we exist, is in a very literal way, a mirror of your internal world. That they're connected in that as above, so below, that they're in a relationship with each other, and that relationship is what creates your experience of reality.
Absolutely. And when you transform when you treat somebody's physical structure, sometimes their story will change. But when you treat their story, their physical structure always changes.
So my point of view about it is that mental health is what we consider mental health. We're using the wrong term because it's really spiritual health, because you're talking about the non-physical. When you say mental health, and this is how mental health is treated in a lot of cases, it's treated as a physical thing, right? Like here's some pills that'll change the chemicals in your brain and you'll be fine. And please don't get me wrong. For a period of time, being on antidepressants was very helpful to me. And then they turned on me. And this is what happens to a lot of people. The medications that you're on that are helping you, it's like they just turn around and they start hurting you after a couple of years. And that happened to me in a really hard way. And I've really started to realize that, it's your body health, your mental health, and your spiritual health are also related to each other. You can't have total body health if you have poor mental and spiritual health. And you can't have total spiritual health if you have poor mental and body health.
Absolutely. And I would say your physiology, like those biochemical responses, are the result of your story and your structure together, that your story and your structure drives your physiology.
Yeah.
And that treating the physiology is like treating the symptom, not treating the
not treating the underlying
problem
cause, right? Not trying
with it. That when you can change the structure of the body, both physical and energetic, so that it, opens up the pathway to a different story, then you're going to get a different physiological output. Yeah, I mean, I think that's essentially what the story is, that structure plus story equals physiology. And so if you work on your structure and your story, you will change the output.
And that's why meditation is so important, because when you meditate, your brain will start doing these things automatically on its own. If you're able to go into a deep state of meditation, and meditation, from what I understand, has an electrical stimulation effect on the vagus nerve. And that's the physical sensation that you start to get of your chakras opening and Kundalini energy. For example, these things happen during meditation because meditation stimulates that nerve.
Absolutely. The research on the benefits of vagus nerve for with meditation and mindfulness are absolutely positive. My experience is that it can be challenging to meditate or mindfulness yourself out of a pinched vagus nerve, like if you've really got some mechanical compression going on.
Yeah.
And so I find that the exercises that I give people for this, and I have them, if people go to my website, melanieweller.com, and sign up for the email list, it'll email you a free vagus nerve decompression course. And
Cool.
that you can like self-assess and self-treat, that it amplify, you get this, you get a much faster response, that you don't, like, we don't have to be, now the name of the myth is, slipped my mind. It's the pushing the boulder up the hill.
Oh God, I know exactly what you're talking about. But I can't
but we just often take the path of most resistance, or like, we're not like, we can make this so much easier and create some flow so that you don't have to always be going through this uphill battle. When I experience resistance to meditation, I'm like, all right, so where is the block, in my own system? And then how do I get out of the way so that, or get the restriction out of the way so that I can get into that deeper state more easily. But I think absolutely playing this game of how easy can we make it is so incredibly valuable, because and we're all incredibly slow learners, like, and that's kind of, and so we all have to have a lot of self-compassion for ourselves in that.
Yeah. And to get out of these, the typical thought patterns, because I know a lot of people who have a path of most resistance mindset. It's like, you got to have 3 jobs, you got to grind, you got to be constantly stressed out, or you're not going to be successful. That's not true. It's not true at all. In fact, living that way destroyed my life. Working 2 jobs, or as a chef, working just 80 hours a week, constantly being stressed out, constantly trying to fix everything around you. It's not an enjoyable life, and you're not going to be successful that way. If you do end up successful that way, it's, you're doing something else that maybe you're unaware of as well. Because keeping yourself in a constant state of stress and anxiety and physical exhaustion is not the path to success and happiness. It's just not.
Absolutely. No, it's I mean, I was programmed that working harder was going to get me better results. And, part of the reason I started my own practice is because I got tired of seeing 16 and 18, 20 people in 14 slots in my schedule.
Yeah.
It was not sustainable for me to do that. And I have a strong enough hermit archetype that I need time alone. I can't be surrounded by people all day long, every day. Like, I've got to have that, like, some good balance in that.
Yeah.
and patients all day long, and then family all evening was way too many people for me.
That's too much. It's not. Self-care is so important, so that's another thing you could say that's coming and is happening now is the expansion of the science of self-care and the importance of self-care is way understated in our kind of everyday culture.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And, you know, so many have been programmed that self-care is selfish. And the thing is, when you do when you work on yourself, the world shifts around you.
Yes.
And amazing doors open. And even the story I usually tell around this is when my youngest son was about 8 or so, he was a little bit slower to be fluently reading than his peers were. And so he was getting some support in school, and then he labeled himself a bad reader, and then he didn't want to read. And it was this whole thing that we didn't want it to be at that point.
Yeah.
And I had made a major breakthrough with the life coach that I was working with at the time. And literally like 4 hours later, he comes up to me and says, "Mom, I think I'd like to write a book." And I was like, "Great. I'll set you up on the computer."
That's awesome.
And, you know, and he spent a few months writing short stories and books, you know, or like what he thought, you know, but he really learned that totally accelerated his ability to read from what it was. And it's like, I got my past out from in front of, you know, cleared the path in front of me, and it gave him space to expand that he hadn't had because I was taking up too much space with my own garbage. And, you know, and I've seen that over and over. And so if you pay attention to it, it's there, but we don't always, you know, it's just not a thing that we have a language or like really a wiring for, you know, we're just not always attending to it.
Yeah, it's so subtle, you know, and it's working with the subtle energies and shifts of consciousness and becoming aware of them, becoming more aware, right? The expansion of consciousness is the expansion of your own awareness to include not only yourself, but everything that's a part of your world, because we are each very much a universe unto ourselves, and those universes interact with each other. But the universe that I exist in is created entirely by my brain, and the universe that you exist in is created entirely by your brain. The version of you that I'm experiencing right now through this Zoom call is a hallucination created by my brain, and the version of me that you're experiencing right now is the same. So when you can really see that and make true internal changes to yourself, then you know beyond any shadow of a doubt, and just through the mechanisms of how the universe works, that by changing yourself, you change the universe.
Absolutely. Yeah. One of my favorite books is The Holographic Universe. And, you know, and if you think about like in a holographic system, each part contains the whole. And that's really, you know, like, I mean, even when you talk astrologically about, you know, Aries in the head and Taurus ruling the throat and things like that, that's still too small for how it really works. Like it's a good, you know, it's helpful to understand the parts because it does help you understand the whole.
It helps you start to discern the patterns of the universe. Astrology, numerology, all these practices, that's not the complete picture, man. It's just a very basic map of the patterns and how they play out and how they're always playing out together. But there's so much more past that.
Absolutely. Well, and even when you dig into the rulership, you know, that even with Aries ruling the head, that you've got Mercury ruling the nervous system and Uranus ruling the electrical signal, and Pisces rules the fluid in the eyes and things like that, you know. And so like you've got you start to really get every sign at every layer, that each part of your body is its own, each chakra is its own little, is its own universe with its own, you know, maybe the planetary arrangements is a little bit different with some of us. But I do find that when you get those fundamental pieces, you know, with the rulerships in place, that it's sort of like this framework on which your soul hangs itself. And if you get the Aries right in your head and the Taurus right in your throat and the Leo right in your heart and the Gemini right in your lungs and the Cancer right in your breast and stomach and Virgo right in your intestines and so on, that then your own personal arrangement has a much more stable structure on which to hang itself.
Yeah, it's in harmony rather than totally
Very
out of
much in
whack.
harmony, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't, like, that's always where I start with people, and and then maybe like I'll need to tweak their personal astrology. But if you get that fundamental structure in place, the personal stuff just goes, whew, thank you. I don't have to work so hard to be who I am, because it's got that support.
Right. And understanding these concepts really helps you let go of a lot of the things that people are hanging on to, right? Like when you understand your life path number, for example, when you really understand your rising sign, or Chiron, or your North Node, then you take another step back and just go back to when you start to discern these patterns and the reasons, you stop wondering why about everything, and you just point to like, that's why. I know why, because I understand, I see the patterns and how the universe works, and so I know the why, and I'm no longer obsessing about it. And that obsession with why do I hurt? Why does this happen to me? Why did this happen to me? And so on and so forth. You can just be like, oh, okay, let it go.
But it gives you a learn something too. I had years of nephritis and Achilles tendonitis that I was really trying to sort out what my path and purpose, the path and purpose issues it was telling me, because it was my feet. And it happened at a point when I was completely changing my practice from being more traditional to more alternative, into being under the radar to being more visible. And so that came with some growing pains. And I had really been working on stillness for myself, and stillness in my in the Gene Keys system, which is another astrology based system. Stillness is the highest expression of the bottom part of that chart, which for me, I would put with the feet. I use it, like I would overlay it on the body and put that with the feet. So I'd really been thinking about stillness with my feet and meditating on that. And then I broke my foot. And I was like, well, I guess I haven't been still enough. Like now I really have to be still. And when I went to the to urgent care to get an x-ray, because initially I was like, oh, it's not broken, it's okay, I was like checked into my body, and I was like, is it broken? And my body was like, no, it's not broken. And then like an hour later I was like, all right, Melanie, if you were looking at yourself, what would you say? And you'd say, go get an x-ray. This isn't right. And so the doctor that saw me, she said, Melanie, you're the happiest person with a fracture that we've ever seen. And I said, well, thank you. It means I'm at least doing my vagus nerve work. I've got, this under stress. And I had very little pain in the recovery. And seeing, like literally the first thought I had when I fell, when I was still in shock, was I have not been still enough, that it was, and giving it that purpose, I think really made the recovery virtually pain-free.
Yeah, and also having that understanding that things happen in your exterior world as a result of the imbalances in your internal world. So you're saying, I'm not being still enough, and then the universe says, well, I'm going to fix that for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and on the other side of it, I've had a number of past life readings that included Chinese foot binding, and being a sex worker and having my Achilles tendon cut so I couldn't run away again, and all like crazy foot stuff in my readings. And in the way that bones, rocks and crystals hold our oldest memories, I actually think that foot fracture allowed the release of some of those memories that were literally tripping me up.
Oh, that's really cool.
that it served me, and it just like the bone just had to break so that it could, like, I could move on. Yeah.
So the energy, that vibration that you were holding in that part of your body could be released.
Absolutely. And so
it literally was tripping you up. That's funny.
It literally was tripping me up. And I think that the story around, whether you have a past life reading, like the story in there that needed to go. And I think that when when something that seems negative or tragic happens to you, being able to ultimately see how it's serving you really just opens so many incredible doors and opportunities. And I know that, that's not always or usually an overnight process for people. It takes a lot, it takes some deep reflection and support to get there. But if our first reaction to that, to having something happen was, oh, this is happening for me versus to me, like, I think that would change our physiological reactions to all of it. Several years ago, I fell carrying, I almost never see clients in their homes. They come to my office, but I made an exception and I went to go see somebody in their home, and I was carrying my table into their house, and I tripped on their steps, and I just landed down on my knee, and I was like, oh, I guess my pelvis needed to be knocked back into place. But it totally, rather than thinking, oh my gosh, now I have to schedule with my physical therapist and my massage therapist and like, who's going to fix me? I was like, oh, I guess something needed to be knocked back into place. And, and I had a very minimal reaction to it.
Yeah, it's a very shamanistic point of view, and it's one that I really enjoy. And it's when you see the exterior world as a reflection of your internal world, then you see that it's always trying to feed you information. Everything, there's meaning in everything. I'm not trying to say you should go crazy thinking that every time you see the number 33 that it's some crazy sign from the universe. Those things are real, but there's always a purpose to everything that's going on around you. And if you can learn to see it that way, or just learn to experience, have that experience. Like I tell people all the time, if something in your life doesn't work out the way you wanted to, it probably wasn't the right thing for you. Just let it go.
Absolutely. Well, and there we go back to, Osiris probably thought he was supposed to be the king of Egypt, but really he was supposed to be the king of the underworld. And that's, I thought I was supposed to be a highly credentialed physical therapist. And I so much more enjoy and feel my calling in showing up as a highly credentialed high priestess.
Yeah. And thank God for that, because I think what you do, like I said, is revolutionary and fascinating, and is going to be, this type of healing work is going to have a major place in the coming world that we're moving into.
Thank you. I definitely, that's certainly my goal for it. And to, and to take it even beyond healing and medicine into, because I think our businesses and institutions have a really unique chance to design themselves in ways that keep us out of needing medical care in the first place, that we can really use this to for wellness in ways that make us organically healthier. Because so often what I find is that or a question I ask people a lot is filling your cup draining you? And it's, and it's not about what you're doing most of the time. It's about how you're being. And if you're going to be differently, you're going to make different choices, and that'll be more supportive for you. And so
and you'll experience more optimal health as just a natural consequence.
Yep. When my crown is on straight and my boots are on right and my, high priestess robe is fluffed up, things are good.
Yep.
Things good. And then that's where I experience flow. Yes. And so, and I can stay in the flow of life versus getting yanked in and out of it, because that's what's really stressful.
Yeah. And being in, now there's a couple ways to talk about this, right? Flow state is a real thing. And you talk a lot about flow state on your pages, I've noticed. But to me, it also just means being in that place where you're in alignment with the universe and you are going with the flow and you're not resisting everything that happens to you.
Absolutely.
Flow is not just a state of mind, it's a state of being.
Yes. Yeah. No, I think flow is a cosmic term. I see it in a very cosmic way.
Yeah. All right, Melanie. Well, it's been wonderful talking to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Sandra. This is great.
Yeah. We'll have to do it again. And I'm really looking forward to just following your work over the next several years and seeing where it goes and what types of stories are going to come out of this method of healing.
Thank you. I am too. I'm excited.
Okay. I'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.